Welcome to FutureX, the podcast where we look to solve the variable that is the future of Web3. Every week, we'll talk with some of the brightest minds in the blockchain and Web3 space, from top investors to founders and builders, paving the way for a decentralized world. So what is the future of blockchain? What will Web3 look like in 2050? Let's explore together.
Cooper, thanks so much for being here today. Why don't we start with a brief introduction to the FutureX audience on who you are and what your role is in the Web3 space?
Hey, Mark, thank you so much for having me on here today. I really appreciate it. So, I've been working in the Web3 space for about 3 years. Initially started when I was just coming out of school, in which I joined one of the quickest growing protocols in the Solana ecosystem. I joined there doing everything from business development to partnerships to strategy, and I've joined and done the same here at Injective Labs, where I kind of work as a business development associate, underscoring and underpinning a lot of the development that we're doing in terms of kind of the institutional blockchain development, in addition to a lot of the work that we do specific to onboarding different projects, different ecosystem partners. So really, I would say that specific to a layer one, kind of the business development role is very flexible, and covers a lot of different space. But more generally, I've been covering onboarding more institutional market makers and institutional types of liquidity profiles to our blockchain at the moment.
Awesome. So I know you do have a background in finance, right? You studied undergrad at the London School of Economics, and I believe you spent some time in the University of Miami as well.
Yep, that's right. So I graduated actually from the University of Miami, and while before I transferred in there, I was able to study and take some courses also at the London School of Economics, namely corporate finance and a few other courses. But super glad to be a University of Miami Canes alum.
So coming from this, traditional educational background in finance, what got you into Bitcoin and the crypto industry as a whole?
Yeah, that is a great question, and something I love to dive into. So I was working at one of the largest brokerages across the world, here in New York, which is called Tradition. And there, I really understood kind of a central limit order book, or really how brokerage worked. And there, what happens in a traditional brokerage is there's a gold desk, there's a commodities desk, there's all different types of these desks, and essentially they have counterparties at these different forms of banks on both ends. And I had really understood, right, that you had to match a buyer with a seller, and very basic concepts on a high level. And I saw kind of this meme coin phenomenon, or lack of a better term, while I was still studying in school, and I saw these people on paper making hundreds of millions of dollars via social media. And when taking a look into these different types of things back in the day, I had realized that none of these tokens were available on Coinbase or Binance or otherwise, but they were available on something called Uniswap. And after taking a deep look and taking a read into the Uniswap white paper, I was astounded by the innovation that was occurring. You had something that was this quote unquote automated market maker that could match buyers and sellers without any centralized brokerage or counterparty connecting those two things. And to be honest with you, transparently, that was really the main driver that got me into crypto initially. Just being so interested by that concept, and from there, kind of the rest is history. I had passively been investing in Bitcoin and all these different types of things for years, but not working directly in the space. And that really drove me to find my first role in the space. And that was kind of right before my first big bull market in 2021, where I joined a team that was backed by most of kind of the core Solana teams, such as Circle, Serum, FTX, etc., where I built a collateralized deposition with an incredibly talented team. And shortly thereafter made the move to Injective Labs.
What was it like making that jump from like the Solana ecosystem into Injective and the broader Ethereum ecosystem?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, it's definitely fair to say that I was a quote unquote Solana maxi. Um, and I kind of, not even that I was a Solana maxi, that's what I was exposed to. And the culture that they had built within that ecosystem was so strong and vibrant and so passionate towards kind of Solana as this one kind of monolithic chain that I'd never really opened my eyes to things like Cosmos app chains. I knew what they were, I understood what they were, but I wasn't necessarily kind of that open to the concept of them. And really, after kind of taking a look outside of the Solana ecosystem, I realized how much innovation was going on. And I think what really drove me to Injective and something that I think that really made sense was this kind of app chain thesis and the concept that you're not going to have a singular blockchain that can, fit the specific needs of every single use case. But if we kind of take on the role of tackling one specific vertical, in our case, it's finance, then, we'll be significantly kind of, in better position to actually, find new users and bring on real adoption.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been following you guys for a while, and Injective was pretty early onto the app chain narrative, right? I think now it's pretty common. Everyone's doing it with Cosmos and even with the ZK rollups um, as a service. But I think you guys were pretty early on, like driving this narrative around app chain. I know you guys bill yourself as a blockchain built for finance. Can you explain a little further on what that means and like what does it mean to be built for DeFi?
Yeah, great question. So, and you're totally right. The team initially took the Cosmos SDK. I know our CTO and Eric, our CEO, were working, kind of in the days where Polygon and Matic, were initially kind of incubated, and they had, in some senses, forked the Cosmos SDK to build out their native L1, and I think that kind of gave inspiration to our team to kind of utilize the same thing. But you are right. Our two co-founders were incubated by Binance back in the day now, I believe, over 4.5 years ago. And the premise was to build this MEV proof decentralized exchange that could kind of, take away a lot of the different forms of things that didn't exist well on Ethereum. So on Uniswap, you have all these different, types of attack vectors, as well as, different ways you can be front run. And the goal of Injective was to kind of build a easily, bridgeable deck so you could easily access it from ETH, but you would, be able to trade in a very seamless way, just with one click and one hop on the bridge. So they built this chain to have things such as sub-second block times, in addition to, instant finality, in addition to, all these concepts of being essentially MEV proof. So essentially, they built a blockchain that it was incredibly scalable and kind of existed for things like finance-based applications. And for me, the most important part is that the chain is permissioned. So not anyone can come on and upload smart contracts for a new gaming project that will kind of submit hundreds of thousands of transactions. I think the thing that resonates, best with me is that if I'm trying to send you, Mark, $1 billion or $100 million through a transaction, my transaction should not be competing for kind of space with a transaction that is, sending an NFT, right? And that was the thesis. The thesis was that we are only going to kind of utilize this block space and this blockchain for kind of financial, activity and financial based transactions.
Got it. Do you think? I mean, like, I think that's an interesting concept. Taking a permissioned approach to this infrastructure, right? Does that take away from the kind of the decentralized nature of Web three?
Yeah, great question. And something that, when I initially bring up the permission aspect of Injective as a chain, it's very important to also include that I think in terms of the decentralized nature, it actually adds an added benefit because now everything has to go through governance. And our governance is rather robust and it's rather decentralized at the moment, where community members can come into our forums as well as vote on chain to pass or reach quorum for any of these things to kind of be uploaded to the chain. So in my opinion, this is actually a real use case for our governance system and for our governance protocol for all of our different holders, whether it be VCs who invested along the way to average kind of, investors and holders in the token. All of them have a say in terms of what's getting uploaded to the chain, and their voice is very much heard. Even some of the smallest voices in our governance forums are, kind of, some of the voices that are, doing things like changing how incentives are planned and changed, and kind of introducing us to new applications that could be, joining the chain. So I would say from my perspective, it's probably just bootstrapping these things even more.
Got it. So when you say permission, it's governed by the DAO, not necessarily not by a centralized team.
Yes, that's correct.
Got it. So when you mentioned some of the benefits of how Injective was designed with the instant finality, the scalability that's inherently built into the chain. I mean, that sounds like a perfect use case for a perfect scenario for perp stexes, right? And
Right.
derivatives in general. Are there some use cases that have really picked up steam in the Injective ecosystem? And are you seeing any trends in the DeFi space?
Yeah, 100%. So I can speak to a couple. I think there's kind of limitless kind of opportunity at the moment, but I think kind of the one that makes the most sense here is the team has built these Web3 modules. And by Web3 modules, essentially that means that they're out of the box solutions that developers can take in a white labeled sense and fork to their own customizable needs. And the greatest example of this at the moment is our exchange module. So right now, if you were building a decentralized exchange on Arbitrum or on Solana or on Polygon or on you name it, you would have to build the core exchange logic from 0 to 1. And what these modules take you from, and to immediately is kind of all the way to that 0 to 1 stage. So you don't have to worry about how insurance funds work. You don't have to worry about how the matching mechanism occurs fully on chain via frequent batch auctions. You don't have to worry about all the complexities and what goes into an exchange. You essentially can take our exchange module, you can fork your different front end, and you can find a liquidity provider on the back end to provide liquidity towards whatever pair you kind of need or want. And all of a sudden, you have an exchange up and running in potentially just a couple of days. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that that's really the core differentiator. We've been working with teams such as Trueflation, who I knew Eric, our CEO, just did a large podcast with, and that concept, it kind of found itself true. We had a team that has real world asset price feeds, such as kind of an EV index as well as a CPI index, et cetera, and they wanted to create a DEX environment. And they're not kind of a native DEX builder. They don't want to spend 8 to 12 months building a DEX, but they want people to utilize their product and a proof of product. They were able to come over to Injective, take our out of the box Web3 module, and build it. And I think that's a testament towards what we're building. We've seen several teams do that with our binary options module. Our team is building out several new modules to date, such as our lending module, et cetera. And we're just excited to be a software and technology provider that can excel the future of finance and kind of democratize the future of finance so that anyone across the world will be able to take our exchange module, our lending module, our binary options module, and spin up applications that they can use and kind of democratize this opportunity in terms of financial applications.
Yeah, I think that's a that's really exciting because I think the next wave of DeFi apps and just Web3 apps in general are going to compete on the front end, right? So you're saying you already have this kind of infrastructure built out for you. All you need to do is figure out your front end and then build out the brand, the community, and everything else that kind of that differentiates products, right? Um, yeah, so that's an interesting approach. I know you guys have a lot of other things going on. You guys just introduced Nexus, which is the your official blockchain data integration with Google Cloud. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Could you tell me more about that partnership and kind of, how far along you guys have come with that so far?
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, transparently, I don't work on the team that's heading up kind of our partnership with Google Cloud. So, I would kind of pass that off to some of my incredible teammates who landed that, great deal on our end. But what I can say is that I know that the Google Cloud team is incredibly kind of, Web3 friendly and really working and understanding kind of what's occurring in the space. So, on a high level, kind of my understanding is that there is so much data that's being stored from these blockchains. And specifically, right, we are a financial blockchain. We want access to all this different types of data. And at the end of the day, a lot of this data is incredibly expensive for teams that are kind of small and within our ecosystem and trying to bootstrap. And many of these teams, like Google Cloud, have partnered up with Injective to offer kind of, in some sense, abatements towards their kind of different forms of kind of Web3 offerings. And I know that we're super excited and just working on our latest hackathon with a team at Google Cloud. And they sponsored our, Injective Illuminate hackathon, which has, brought and seen over hundreds of builders and I think over 80, incredible projects. Um, so kind of to speak more to that, I know our team is working on some other stuff that, I can't speak to on the call today
Hmm.
with Google Cloud, but on a high level, kind of having access in a very seamless way to the blockchain data that exists and having a trusted partner like Google there and Google knowing that, we're working to be one of the quickest and most robust Web3 innovators. I think that has really driven that partnership successfully.
That's awesome. And I know you weren't, involved in the Google Cloud partnerships, but just generally speaking, what do you guys do to kind of attract these kind of the buy-in from some of these major partners, right? Whether it be TradFi, big tech. What do you think Injective does well to get their buy-in?
Yeah, great question. So from my perspective, right, you have all these people that are living in this Web2 world, and they know and they're immensely interested in what's happening in this Web3 world. But a lot of the times, everybody in this Web3 world is just speaking at, far too high of a level, working on problems and projects that really don't lend themselves kind of specific answers and use cases. And what I would say the team at Injective Labs is doing is really working on use cases to onboard the next million or billion to this crypto space. Um, and what do I mean by that specifically? We work on things and have things such as institutional decks. And more specifically, right, we are a blockchain built for institutional finance. One of my main roles at Injective Labs is to go out and onboard market makers. So I'm working with the Citadels all the way to the Jump Cryptos to the Brevin Howers of the world to onboard them to our blockchain and to kind of have them utilize our infrastructure to kind of so to hop into it a bit, a decentralized exchange while that's built on a limit order book, there needs to be liquidity.
Hmm.
And sticky liquidity needs to exist, which means that if I'm a retail buyer and I want to come in and place a Bitcoin perpetuals trade, I need someone on the back end who will match my trade. And kind of the purpose of working with a lot of these major institutions is having liquidity providers on the back end who can service that role for us. And that lends us initially to being much more kind of institutionally driven. And once we've opened that gate and built out a lot of the verbiage and language and kind of materials, I think it's easier to go to a lot of these different institutional players and have them build into our stack. Because at the end of the day, right, we are looking to be that software provider and that technology provider that not many others are and having partnership with a lot of these teams and being the aspect of the actual software and the technology that gets built, I think is rather unique in our case.
How are your market maker efforts have been going? What are some of the challenges you guys face in working with some of these market makers or getting them to, get active on the Injective ecosystem?
Yeah, awesome. So, I would say from my perspective, kind of the most important aspects um, are getting these different types of market makers acquainted with what is really kind of this decentralized landscape. So in traditional finance, you often find that many of these things are incredibly regulated across the board, and there's different ways to plug in, right? So we have taken an approach in being the most compliant team within the Web3 space that I can think of that is attracting these different types of folks. So we announced something called Helix Institutional, and Helix Institutional is the first fully on-chain and KYC'd kind of decentralized exchange kind of environment and infrastructure that allows for different forms of teams, such as these more institutional players to come on, plug in, and know that who their counterparty is. Not know specifically who they're matching with on the trade, but know that everyone within this kind of closed environment, but that is fully on chain, utilizing this Web3 technology, um, is kind of KYC'd and kosher. In addition, I would say that building out the most friendly SDKs, the most friendly APIs, having the best, and most seamless user experience, having integrations engineers across the board. What I've come to find is that a lot of these Web3 teams, while they advertise that they're so small and lean and can move so quickly, which is so fantastic, a lot of the times they don't have the support to onboard someone from the Web2 world who isn't used to that kind of, build fast and break stuff mentality. And I would say that that's something that sets Injective apart, that we have this kind of Web2 and traditional finance background, and we understand what these different types of users need and potentially, can utilize. And that really helps us kind of, push our offering forward and tailor something to them that makes a lot more sense.
That's great. Yeah, I love that you guys are taking this like hands-on approach to bridging Web 2 into Web 3. Um, Certainly necessary. And, I think most of us, we get kind of lost in this like Web 3 fully decentralized on chain. Everyone kind of does their own thing, builds their own smart contract, deploys their own smart contracts. But if we're going to get some of the bigger players into the space, you definitely need a lot of guidance along the way. You need to provide a lot of guidance along the way.
Agreed.
Going back to the DeFi within the Injective ecosystem. So you mentioned Truflation earlier. I know you guys are also working with the on-chain treasuries provider on Ondo. Can you tell me more about how you're working with Ondo and what that relationship has been like?
Yeah, 100%. And that's something that I can definitely speak to very well. So we have seen a massive kind of narrative across the crypto space in these things called real world assets. And real world assets on a high level are, quote unquote, like actually real assets, whether that's a house or a debt fund or a fund that holds treasury bills in it. Um, and what they're doing is, whether it's bankruptcy or remote, there's all these different things that these different issuers and teams such as Maple, Ondo, Hashnote, Centrifuge, just to name some of the big ones, right? And we're super happy about our collaboration and partnership here with Ondo to really kick things off in the RWA space. But they issue tokens on a blockchain, and those tokens can then be held within a user's account, and there's all these different added benefits to that, such as transparency, such as kind of on-chain immutability, etc. But what doesn't exist to date is really, and what I think and most people I think is the most important aspect, is making those tokens interoperable and making those tokens have functional utility. So we were one of the first ever places to launch and announce a secondary swaps venue utilizing our Injective exchange infrastructure to power one of the first ever USDY, which is the Ondo Finance kind of T-bill cash management product that's accruing treasury, interest, um, to USDT. So this allows for different users that are in USDY that, at the moment may not be able to go swap out of their USDY or go all the way back and redeem their USDY to be able to seamlessly swap to USDT. That exists today. What I'm very excited about, in addition, that we're working on with many of these providers, is different forms of lending and money markets that these different real world assets will be built into, in addition to utilizing these assets as collateral to trade perpetuals, right? And I think that, is a perfect example of why a use case makes so much sense. Um, and needless to say, why would you use USDT when you could use an asset that's pegged to the US dollar, that's accruing 5% interest in a money market? And you're essentially getting, you're earning 5% on holding your position against any of the fees that you're paying otherwise, the funding that you're paying otherwise. I think another great example is lending, right? If I'm going to park my USDT and borrow ETH, why wouldn't I park my USDT or park my real world asset that's earning 5% money market that will pay for kind of the interest that I have borrowing my ETH that I'm then going long on? So there's tons of interesting strategies that can be built, but I think Injective specifically is incredibly well positioned to kind of function as this incredible kind of unique place where you can bring real world assets and plug them into several solutions, as well as build several solutions for your real world asset offering. And that's what we've been super excited to see. And I think that, between us here on the call, we'll have several more of these integrations and partnerships coming down the pipeline in early Q1.
It's awesome. I mean, it seems like RWAs was a big focus for you guys in 2023. What are some of the other big highlights for you guys looking back at the year?
Yeah. Um, Great question. So I joined the team this year. The INJ 2.0, INJ 2.0 was kind of a great testament to our ecosystem and to our community, um, where now all these different applications within our ecosystem can contribute towards our burn mechanism. And our burn mechanism is that, kind of trading fees are kicked back to the chain and utilized through this auction module. Now, different things such as our, first in class NFT marketplace will also be kicking back INJ and fees towards this, towards this burn auction and module as well. From my perspective, the coolest thing has been to see just the ecosystem grow exponentially. So our ecosystem really, when I joined probably about 15 months ago, there was like 3 or 4 projects on chain. Flash forward to today, there's at least 50 projects on testnet or mainnet, with over 10 to 20, really strong projects with large teams that are, finding venture investment, finding over 30,000, 50,000 active users on testnet. So I would really say that, generally speaking, the highlight of the past year for me has been seeing the developers come to Injective and build. And the next phase will be onboarding this next million or billion users to those applications. And I think we have all the tools to really get there.
Yeah, looking toward the future, like before we get to the next billion users, what does 2024 look like for Injective? Like, is there anything exciting on the roadmap that people should be keeping an eye out for?
Yeah. So Injective has tons of interesting things coming up on the roadmap. I think, namely, a lot of the work that we're doing in terms of VM environments is something that I could speak to specifically. So we've been working with 2 of the top rollup providers in Caldera and Eclipse specifically at the moment, to kind of build out this, in EVM and in SVM environment. We noticed and realized, yes, we're building a Cosmos chain, and yes, our native kind of smart contract support and language comes in the form of Cosm Wasm, but there are several people that aren't too familiar or have a background in Cosm Wasm. There are hundreds of thousands of developers who are familiar with Solidity, and we want to bring them into that ecosystem, into the Injective ecosystem, and have them flourish and have them have the tools that they need. So I think that what we'll be super excited to see in 2024 are these new VM environments go live. Um, and be added to the kind of injective ecosystem and environment where we can build all, and bring in all these different types of applications. Because if you think about it on a high level, right, how big is the Cosmos ecosystem relative to the entire crypto ecosystem? And opening
Right.
ourselves up to that and expanding ourselves will be, a huge push in 2024.
And so, do you guys plan to bridge the Solana and the SVM and the EVM ecosystem? Will there be composability across the ecosystem? Unified liquidity. What would that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we view Injective as, and the L1 in the Cosmos sense as this unified liquidity layer where we have all these different institutional market makers, which I noted directly, who are providing constant liquidity via our open liquidity program and otherwise on an on-chain ongoing basis. And the question is to your point, right? Since we're building out these incredible rollups, how do these rollups, kind of roll down to our native L1 and utilize that liquidity? And we're working with a ton of incredible teams at the moment, from our support with Wormhole to our support with Axelar to our potential collaborations coming up here with Hyperlane to build composability and kind of seamless liquidity access from these rollups to our native L1. So it is fair to say, yes, that while these, different kind of connecting VM environments and connecting them in an incredibly composable way is probably the most difficult problem that crypto faces at the moment. And I'd say that stay tuned for 2024 because I think we're going to come out and announce some of the coolest and most kind of up-to-date solutions.
Awesome. So, for a developer building or interested in building um, within the Injective ecosystem, what kind of support can they expect from the team? Because I think the reality in this landscape where there's so many different options in terms of L1s and L2s is that it not only comes down to the technology. I wish it was all about the technology, right? But there's so many other factors these days. There's meme attention, right? How much kind of community attention are you getting? There's the overall brand, but then there's also the ecosystem support, whether it be incentives, marketing support, BD support. Like, what can a developer expect who joins your ecosystem?
Yeah, 100%. I think that right now the Injective Labs team is providing more support, and this is coming from someone who's worked in other ecosystems, is providing more hands-on support than probably any other layer one blockchain. So we have, full-on access if you're coming to build in the Injective Labs ecosystem to our developers, to office hours, to connect with them directly, to answer any questions on how your code could be a bit better or a review of your code itself. That's on the developer side, and I think that that's really the most important part.
Mm.
And also kind of providing those different forms of developers with access to things that are going to make them succeed. So we have a marketing team who hands-on is helping these different teams craft their go-to-market strategies, from having them utilize different forms of campaigns to helping them build out their Twitters. Our marketing and growth teams are really hands-on and are incredible and really sorting out and pushing that forward. And I'd say lastly, right, everyone wants access to funding. And I think a lot of these different teams take the wrong approaches in just writing blank checks to all these different teams that are building. Injective utilizes, and I would say kind of our, senior leadership team have utilized and taken into account a much different approach. And that's we're more than happy to support any of these teams and bootstrap them with things such as our $150 million venture ecosystem consortium, which essentially consists of all of Injective's kind of top cap table leaders that have invested, in Injective as well as, have earmarked funds to be deployed into our ecosystem and make those introductions when the time is right and their development life cycles. I think we've seen that teams that receive funding too early are usually the teams that never succeed, and teams that kind of can have the support across their life cycle from both the Injective Labs team as well as a lot of our venture and ecosystem consortium efforts. Is incredibly important. So that is kind of what I would say from developer help to marketing to growth to access to capital. We're there on every front in supporting these developers.
You guys also work with developers and helping them attract some like bootstrap liquidity because I know you guys work with market makers already, so I assume there could be some path to that.
Yeah, Mark, you're absolutely on it there. So essentially, right, we, as you've noted, have direct connections and plugins with most of the kind of biggest institutional liquidity providers within crypto. And when we build this relationship, they're one call away. So when we have several of these projects go live, they're incredibly interested in being connected as well. And this creates an incredible flywheel because what I've found within the world of DeFi is that people just assume build it and they will come. And from my experience, that is not the case. You need to be ready and have customers to be utilizing your protocol day one. And that's what having these connections with all these institutional liquidity providers is incredibly helpful. And positioning us that we can steer them directly to these developers that are coming out with the hottest new lending protocol and bootstrapping that TVL there to get started. So yeah, right to your point, we can really help on that front as well.
It's awesome because I think being a perp specs ourselves, we find that the liquidity is one of the most challenging parts to bootstrap for like in a newer project, right? And you get like a little bit of a or an egg problem where traders will come, but only if there's enough liquidity. They want to be able to trade without impacting too much of that market, right? And then liquidity providers will come if there are enough takers, but how do you get the liquidity first, right? So, yeah, I think this strategic partnership with some of these market makers that you guys work with, that's the right approach.
100%.
Awesome. So, it sounds like there's a lot going on for Injective. Very excited to follow the Injective journey to see what 2024 pans out like. Excited to see what you guys do with the SVM space as well. Um, What are some of your personal predictions in crypto, right? What would you like to see outside of Injective, you know, not only in 2024, but maybe over the next few years?
Yeah, great question. My core thesis is that, right, there's so much funding, there's so much incredible talent within this industry. Yet to date, I have only seen a handful of applications who have really found product market fit and onboarding users. And I would say what I'm most, passionate about and what I'm most interested in is finding the product and building that product and being a part of building that product that will onboard truly the next million or billion users and find real use case. I find that a lot of what exists still in the space is kind of research heavy, kind of, you know, problem solving that really isn't tackling a Web 2 use case. And finding a Web 2 use case and building a Web 3 backend to it is what I think is kind of going to, propel us into the future of this Web 3 space. So I would say that, more generally, creating applications that are truly here to onboard the next, user to crypto is by far kind of what my predictions are. Um, and what I'm most passionate about. And I think we'll see a move away as we get some of this regulatory clarity in 2024. I expect to be a lot, there to be a lot of movement on the regulatory front globally in the year 2024. And I think that that will sort out and kind of fish out a lot of the projects that exist in the space. And, I think it'll be kind of, some aspect of a potential cleanse that it could exist that could be very, very strong for our entire industry.
I completely agree to your point about, the Web 2 to Web 3, because sometimes I think with Web 3, people get so technical, they get so lost in the innovation of everything that they start solving for problems that don't yet exist, right? So,
100%.
I think that if we're going to drive the next wave of adoption, we have to figure out a way to solve some of the problems that exist in Web 2 using Web 3 technology, but with a seamless bridge along the way.
100%.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience here today?
No, I just would, give a huge thank you to the team here and Mark specifically for having me on. And, would love to be helpful and hop on in the future and also share, our journey as we continue to grow.
That's awesome. For anyone who wants to follow along with the Injective journey, where should they go?
Yeah, 100%. So our Twitter, I interestingly would say, from my perspective, you can find the most up-to-date news. So that's, you can just search Injective on Twitter. Also pop over to injective.com, as well as, to learn more about Injective Labs, injectivelabs.org, I believe it is. And take the journey from there. I would say that utilizing our Twitter, reading our blogs, taking a run through of different things like helixapp.com, are probably your first step into the ecosystem. But just taking a look at kind of our core ecosystem website and going from there.
Yeah, Twitter is the place to be. I mean, it's where all of us crypto people live. So that's a good place to start. Well,
Yes,
Cooper, thanks so much for being here today. I look forward to having you on again as there's additional progress in the Injective ecosystem. Um, yeah, and really enjoyed this conversation.
likewise. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the FutureX podcast. Subscribe on Spotify or wherever you're listening to this episode.